for discussion. We don't have a formal, question answer or anything. Just one other thing is yesterday, and I think through the mail, we sent out a piece that was from Lenin's Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. It was from the chapter, Should Revolutionaries Work in Reactionary Trade Unions? So I hope everybody here got it. There's a few copies here, but we don't have a photocopier right now. It's down. So if you don't have one and we run out, please let us know and we can get it to you, another time. And then also, and this one you can have fewer of, and we can't copy, but we can get to you later. Milt wrote about 11 years ago in a magazine that Workers' World published for about 10 years called Liberation and Marxism, and he wrote an article, The Role of Communists in the Labor Movement. So that was also part of the reading. It wasn't required to read it before the class, so you won't be tested on it, but if you want it after the class, we have a few copies and we'll get more if you need it. So can everybody over there see? Okay. Yeah, Monica.
Okay. To minimize any noise during this class, if people need more stuffing, just raise it, just raise whatever you need.
Great idea.
And I will, all right.
I had two other announcements. I'm sorry. Just what we're mailing. This is really important. There's no Workers' World meeting next Friday or class next Saturday because there is a very important Workers' World presidential campaign rally, an outside hall, PS 41. We really want to build this. That's what this mailing's for, and we would really appreciate it, and it would be, a tremendous help if anyone here can take some of these cards today and get them out to your school, to your laundromat, your apartment building, on the street, on the subway home, whatever. And we have about 10,000 of this new brochure on the presidential campaign of Workers' World Party that you can take some of these as well, because this gives you a little bit more, political background about who the candidates are and what they have to say. So, and one last thing, because of the street fair, Milt had to park in a parking lot, so we don't want him to have to pay for that. And also, we bought, some refreshments, so I'm just going to pass this around, and anybody, if you can contribute. We don't charge for the class or anything, but, obviously it would help with the expenses if you could contribute a little. All right, so we want to turn over the class to Milt.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Welcome. I enjoy watching comrades work while I talk. I don't have to tell the comrades that we're living in very turbulent times. The crisis of the war at home, the splits in the ruling class, has, among other things, has deeply affected the labor movement, its leaders, and the rank and file. That includes the unorganized, the immigrants' struggle, LGBT, women's, could go on and on about the ferment that's going on, that's impacting now within the labor movement, the organized labor movement, and encourage comrades to get a copy or get it off the computers, a Business Week article, which I'm not going to go into this in my talk, but will indicate the tensions that have broken out within the AFL-CIO leadership. I would like to start out my remarks by pointing out, because it probably isn't well known, that Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky were not just theoreticians. They wrote extensively clarity in the struggle from 1848, the Communist Manifesto, Capital that Marx wrote, Engels, Anti-Düring. I don't want to go through all the literature. But what's kind of in the background is that these leaders were not only theoreticians, they were organizers. They were brilliant strategists and tacticians. And the historic record shows that. As far back as 1864, Marx conceived of the First International, which was basically a workers' movement that struggled to come alive with all kinds of crises, and unfortunately or fortunately, finally ended up in the United States. But during that date, it was an interesting, not coincidence, but conjuncture, that the fight for the 10-hour day was won. And Marx took note of this based upon his efforts within the International Working Men's, and that's what they called it. Not, if it's today, it would be more than just International Working Men's Association. But I'd like to just quote two short remarks that Marx made as far back as 1864 about the winning the 10-hour day. He said, "It's only the working class that can liberate itself," as he heralded the 10-hour day for the workers. And then he went on to say that though he saw it as a process, not only a bourgeois concession, that's very important, but it would give strength and confidence to the workers to take the next series of class battles with the ultimate goal of a revolutionary process that he raised toward a socialist future. And he said, "Only a struggle with the state," and he means the bourgeois state, "and its machinery can the working class conquer political power." He understood the role of a repressive state, the capitalist state, and how winning concessions could be part of the process. And I emphasize this because I'll have to come back to it later on during the period when Lenin wrote his left-wing communism and infantile disorder. Now, as a result of this sequence of Marx and Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky, our party was born in 1959. But we also went through a series of struggles to illuminate and elevate this tradition as a revolutionary Marxist current. And for 10 years we fought it out in the SWP, which I'm sure, the Socialist Workers' Party, which I'm sure comrades had classes on. But I want to dwell on one aspect of this struggle, and that was the trade union struggle that we faced inside the Socialist Workers' Party, which was a struggle during a very difficult period. The McCarthy period was unfolding, the Cold War, the beginning of the Korean War, and the end of the Second World War, which ended in '45, still had ramifications. Truman passed the Taft-Hartley in 1947, which to this day restricts and restrains and even is a union-busting amendment to the law. I'm sorry? So what was our differences? The majority of the SWP felt there was a period in the labor movement of what they called quiescence. Everything is quiet. Don't do anything. There's nothing you could do. The red baiting, the workers are not moving. They're subject to the wars, the Korean War. And we didn't feel that way in Buffalo. And we had fractions in the steel plants. We had it in the in the auto plants. We had it in the electric plants in the Westinghouse with one of our founders, Dottie Ballin, was able to raise the women's issue to a level that got equality on the job bidding, a tremendous victory. So we worked as communists in these plants, even under difficult circumstances. We were red baited. Our names were in the paper. When the death sentence came down on the Rosenbergs, they wrote us up because of what we were doing. Our approach was, as different from the SWP, was to try to get a block with the Communist Party in those days, because the Communist Party was under the gun. And they were being victimized even more than the fact that we were being red-baited and isolated and couldn't get work, couldn't get jobs. I couldn't run for office in Bethlehem Steel. We were fingered by the labor bureaucracy that were the police agents and the labor lieutenants. Vince Copeland, our founding member, had been fired in a struggle that was anti-Trotskyist, that most workers never heard the word Trotsky and saw Vinnie Copeland as a good, solid American worker. Thousands turned out to defend him. So there was, the point I want to make and then leave is there was lots of ferment. There was wildcats that we were participants in. We worked with the workers as they were, trying to educate them, trying to raise the level of consciousness, trying to move them in a direction of building and strengthening their trade union work. And we had some successes. So I'm raising this because I feel this was in the tradition of what I said earlier, under Sam Marcy's leadership, the tradition that I said earlier of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky. We kept it alive. We had a revolutionary Marxist position, and in spite of the pressure of a war and red baiting and all the other factors. Now, as a result of that, I'd like to go into the area, because I did discuss in my, and you haven't read my first article I wrote in 1993, how Engels intervened in a struggle in the United States, which was very significant, a struggle between the AFL, which was a crafts-oriented, conservative, case-hardened bureaucracy, collaborative, you can name all the most reactionary terminology to him. And yet he called on Engels to resolve a struggle, and I'm not going to go into it because it's in my article. He called on Engels to solve a crisis that he had with the Socialist Labor Party as head of the AFL. And the Socialist Labor Party in those days was a very powerful movement, not as we'll go into later as it is today. It was powerful because they recruited thousands of immigrants who came from Europe, Eastern Europe, and Russia, and Germany, France, and Ireland, due to the poverty. And the SLP, the Socialist Workers' Party, wanted to enter in as an organization into the AFL, which was a workers' organization, not a political organization. And Engels sided with a conservative, reactionary labor leader named Gompers, Samuel Gompers. It was a principle about how a party relates to workers who are recruited from their jobs into a labor movement, notwithstanding the fact that that labor leadership and the way that labor movement was a craft-type union, racist and narrow-based. But he realized that the Socialist Workers' Party, which was friendly to Engels, that broke off, unfortunately for the Socialist Labor Party, because the next year, a few years later, in 1890, the AFL led one of the biggest, broadest, multiple mass action for the 8-hour day, and the Socialist Labor Party was isolated because they boycotted it, and the communists that was influenced by Engels joined it, played a role in it, met workers, and it's, in a sense, shows how important the communist movement, the revolutionary Marxists like ourselves, are so critical in times of crisis to give assistance, guidance, and understanding to the complex events that unfold between the labor movement and a party, a socialist party at that. That's what the Socialist Labor Party was. Now, let me bring us up to Lenin's time, when Lenin wrote Infantile Disorder, that's left-wing socialism and infantile disorder. He wrote it for the European, and by the way, the revolution, the seizure of power had taken place 2 years earlier when Lenin wrote this pamphlet. So the prestige of the Soviet Union, notwithstanding that it was not an advanced industrial economy or state, nevertheless the prestige was very high. But there were big problems during the period that preceded that Lenin put aside the counter-revolution that was taking place by the white guards, or what they called them, and decided to write this pamphlet. And I consider this one of the most important pamphlets in regard to his presentation of the problems in the labor movement. Though he wrote it for the European, particularly the Germans and the French, nevertheless it resonated here in the United States. Now, what was going on in the United States at that time when Lenin wrote this pamphlet? And by the way, when he wrote the pamphlet, it happened that Trotsky happened to be in the United States. It was in a little earlier, 1917 and 1918. And Trotsky had meetings in New York where he called for massive opposition to the First World War because the U.S. was on the edge of entering into that First World War. He called for massive opposition through strikes. Here he is in exile, not in exile, but here he is in the United States as a guest, telling the U.S. workers to form strikes, to oppose conscription, and to wage class struggle wherever you can to stop the bourgeoisie from entering, the U.S. bourgeoisie from entering into that First World War. Now, some of the conditions are important to note when Lenin wrote this pamphlet here in the U.S. In the U.S., what was going on at the time was big struggles over the question of entering the war. We know it if we put it in the terms of what's going on today. There was strong support for the war coming from the socialist movement, the Socialist Party, and other groupings from the AFL that was led by Gompers, that was gung-ho for the war, for U.S. entry into the war. And so the issue of the war became a big factor in this country, the First World War. The second big issue that confronted the U.S. workers was the issue, the defense of the Soviet Union that had just made its revolution. And that antagonized the right wing of the Socialist Party. It antagonized the AFL. It led to a lot of red baiting. But it was a major issue that unfolded here in this country. And before the Soviet Union was overturned, it was on the agenda from that day till 1991. The Soviet Union was always on the agenda. Now, other things were breaking out in the U.S. at the same time. There was different currents that were building up their support within the U.S. labor movement. There was the industrial workers of the world. They had a tremendous following in this country. You wouldn't know that today, and you wouldn't know about SLP, Socialist Labor Party. Why? Because no matter how courageous you are, no matter how bold in your tactics, your strategy, in winning concessions for the workers, if you have the wrong program, it could ultimately lead to your downfall. Now, the IWW, which, by the way, recruited some of the most famous, heroic leaders, like Eugene V. Debs, like William, I'm sorry? Yeah, they used to call him Wild Bill Haywood. Even Daniel DeLeon, who became president of the Socialist Labor Party. Even William Forster, who led the 1917 big steel strikes in this country, as well as the founding member of the Socialist Workers' Party that we were a part of, named James Cannon. They all came out of this IWW, led tremendous strikes, particularly in the West. They had a grouping out in the West that Bill Haywood led, called the Western Federation of Miners. They led miners' strikes in the most bitter, brutal Montana and Utah, and they were all historic strikes, Coeur d'Alene and Butte, Montana. And they were all part of this wonderful revolutionary movement. But what was this movement trying to accomplish? Because they had so much hate, and rightly so, for the AFL and Samuel Gompers because of his conservative position, that they decided that they needed a dual union, that they needed unions that had nothing to do with the AFL, that by that time had a few million workers, particularly following the struggle around the 8-hour day. They had won a great deal of workers. So that they wanted an independent union, a dual union, a pure union, a red union, a communist union. And this came back to Lenin. And he wrote this pamphlet. I'll give more reasons for it, but should revolutionaries work in reactionary trade unions? And when you read this pamphlet carefully, and I'll go over it, some of the important points, with a resounding yes, you cannot take a union as it is, as you wish it to be, but as it is, with backward workers, workers that are conservative, workers that are completely in tune with the program of the government, supporting the war, critical of the Soviet Union. So it became a very important point when he wrote this, when Lenin wrote this pamphlet. Now, I want to go over some points because it's unfortunate the class was called late. So I thought I'd put together some points that Lenin raised, and I'll give a brief analysis, and then we'll have discussions subsequent to the period following my talk. Lenin said, the party relies directly on the trade unions. Now he's talking as someone who just went through the rich experiences of making a revolution. See, he had just made the revolution, and he was telling the movements around the world some of the lessons that were learned from the success of a revolution. It's hard to conceive now, but when you seize power successfully, it just resonated all over the world. So Lenin put this thesis through this pamphlet to these movements around the globe. And one of the most important points was how Lenin thought of trade unions as they are with all the problems of a reactionary leadership. He saw the trade unions from the point of view of a relationship to a revolutionary party that could only bring success if that relationship was solidified, even though the minority in the trade unions were not socialist, obviously, but that building a minority of communists and revolutionaries within the trade unions was indispensable to making a revolution. And then he explains that the workers who are organized, they have the potential of, through the organized trade unions, to even become part of a military that would fight for the dictatorship of the proletariat if the block between the communists and the trade unions was solid, even if we were a minority in the trade unions. And then, so that he, putting it in terms of today, one of the big potent possibilities, and we did it in the 50s when we were in Buffalo and Youngstown and other cities where we had the workers, is to build fractions and prepare within the trade unions a communist fraction, a communist who then could organize, relate, understand the problems of their union, understand the problems of their workers. And from that process and development, a revolution, and I should say a major component of a successful revolution, can be achieved. Of course, Lenin included that there needs to be Soviets because so many are not part of the working class. They're unorganized. They're in other movements. They're in cooperatives. So that the Soviets were the key to organizing under the dictatorship of the party. See, society, socialist society. But that the trade unions was also a major, major component to organize the workers, even to bring them closer in, even though, as I said, they constituted a minimum numbers. Now, he also indicated that through those fractions, you have to work ceaselessly, agitate, propagandize, have newsletters, always constantly reaching out to the workers to raise their consciousness, whatever the situation was. Another thing that Lenin raised that's so important for us to know is that when capitalism, and speaking as a successful architect of a revolution, inevitably will lead to socialism. But the legacy of what capitalism has done to the workers doesn't change. It takes years and years to change the ruling class ideology, the deception, the control over all the medias and the state, of course, and its repressive organs. So he said, that's the way it is. They're backward. This is the legacy. Another reason for why communists should go in and not start some pure union and give up the training, the education to leaders like Gompers and others who he mentions in the European labor bureaucracy, the labor aristocracy, that they are only too glad that you left it up and withdrew. Go and build your red unions. We got the workers. That's important. So he said, you can't build socialism with abstract human material. You have to do it with the human material bequeathed to us by capitalism. But he said, too, to counter that the trade unions are the schools. They're the schools that teach, if we're mobilized in these unions, to teach communism in a process. Now, he wrote a pamphlet, a book, I should say, on strikes in 1899, Lenin did, right before the 1905 revolution. It was called On Strikes. And he said, a strike is not a revolution. It's the school that teaches class struggle, class consciousness, and that it's the process of reaching a revolutionary consciousness, so that when you're on strike, you know your enemy, you know your friend, you know your boss, you know your ally, you know the state, its repressive organs. You learn in the course of a strike, you learn what no book will ever teach you, but based upon your experience, you see the class struggle in life. And Lenin wrote extensively, but of course, Lenin, being the brilliant strategist that he was, he said, there are times you have to prepare for strikes. You just don't go out on strike unless the proper preparations are made so that you don't become victimized, you don't become depressed, or you don't become defeatist. And of course, he also indicated that there are all kinds of mass struggles if you're not in the unions, because in that period, the trade unions opened up even though the Tsar was still in power. There was a big upsurge of workers into organizing and fighting for unions. Now, he also made an important point, which I'll touch on. He said, reaction in the labor movement or in the trade unions, even among socialists, they don't like the word dictatorship of the proletariat. That's a term. They just don't like it. They get conjured up because, particularly in a system like capitalist democracy, workers think you vote, you get rights, you win things, that it's democracy. And a dictatorship, well, I'm not for that. And Lenin took that into consideration. As a matter of fact, Eugene V. Debs, who I would say is one of the most pioneer, finest labor leaders in the history of the movement, of the labor movement, from the point of view of the sacrifices he made, his principal positions on the war. He went to jail from a speech he made in Canton, Ohio, 1917, that there's only one war, and that's the class war between labor and management. And they sent him away for 10 years. Now, even Eugene Debs sent a letter to Lenin. I'm opposed to your dictatorship of the proletariat. It just don't resonate right with me. He even indicated that he didn't like Lenin killing off some social revolutionaries who were counter-revolutionaries at the time when power was still at stake. So you can see how difficult it is to understand what the dictatorship of the proletariat is in order to make a revolution, and how difficult it is to explain it even to the best. Other leaders in the IWW felt the same way. So he took that up as a factor in these building fractions, communist fractions in the movement, and also taken into account what some of these great leaders, who also were influenced by anarchism, which I'll go into in a short while. He also, and I think I mentioned this, how important it was, and he wrote it in this pamphlet, how important it is to gauge the conditions under that moment when you want to take an initiative in the class struggle. Have to understand, and how important this is from the point of view of Marxism, how important it is for communists and socialists to become the students of revolutionary Marxism, because only through that's revolutionary Marxism do you have the tools and the instruments for understanding the relationship of class forces in capitalist society, and unravel them and explain them with clarity and objectivity for the purposes not of an academic discussion, but of taking the initiative in a struggle. And he pointed that out as a very important point in his pamphlet. He also wanted to make sure that the anarchists like Debs, Debs joined the Socialist Party later on and ran for office from jail. And by the way, just anecdotally, he never forgave the Communist Party, which are very new. I don't know if it was formed at that time. 1919 is when the Communist Party, under the name the Workers' Party, was formed. But they were underground, and Debs was running for office from prison, and he wanted their support. And unfortunately, and this turned Debs for a while against the communist movement, its early movement, because they boycotted the election. From underground, they decided they couldn't support anybody. And Debs felt that the communists let me down. So important that we run our own candidates. This is an indication of how important it is that under the most difficult circumstances, how important it is to run our own candidates with a revolutionary Marxist development and a socialist perspective, and understanding the class struggle as it is and how we gravitate to the more oppressed on so many issues, as well as the workers who have now moved into the lower paying jobs, service-oriented women, and multinational. But also in this pamphlet, Lenin took after Gompers. He didn't want to give the impression that somehow by being critical of those who didn't want to go into the AFL because it was so reactionary. So he wrote a whole section that attacks Gompers in the most, the language I didn't write, but it's being called craft union, narrow-minded, selfish, case-hardened, covetous, petty bourgeois, labor aristocracy, imperialist-minded, imperialist corrupt. He went on to let the comrades know where he stood on the question of the AFL leadership under Gompers, who, by the way, never relinquished his leadership except for one election. Talk about democracy. Gompers was in power from at least 1886, and it could have been even before. That was when the AFL was founded. To 1924, and he had to die. He had to die. He died not at the, from the ruling class. He died because he was so old. Natural cause. Now, he was very careful about this point when he discussed this dual unionism that I talked about earlier. And he went into it on the basis of its relationship to syndicalism. Now, and therefore a term came up, anarcho-syndicalism. Now, we know today from the youth that was at the RNC, how courageous they are. They're being defined as anarchists. We don't know if they're anarchists. We don't know if they've read Bukharin and, and Proudhon and all of them. And I'm not encouraging you to read it, but there may be a time where we want to take it up, because we have to know everything. But the feeling is that they're defined as anarchists. Well, in those days, the anarchists didn't take it only from Proudhon and the other theoreticians that were part of the French Revolution of 1871 that Marx honored for their courage and their ability to create the first embryo of a worker state. So he was very careful in handling the anarchist syndicalists, except to show that the theory of one industrial union to solve all the economic and political problems brought by imperialism, its armed bodies of men, the state, its repressive organs, it was such a utopian conception that a trade union could solve all those political problems. So, in dealing with the anarchists, and there's an important, if comrades get something from that Sharon had, I was fortunate to get, which was the minutes of the Second Congress of the Communist International that had some leaders coming from all over the world after the Russian Revolution, that Zinoviev, one of Lenin's thinkers, discussed the anarchist movement in this very sensitive but yet thoughtful, yet polemical way. So I'm just giving you a sort of a sketch, thumbnail sketch of how important only this one section that's on reactionary revolutionaries working in a trade union. There's a whole more about parliamentarism and other aspects of the pamphlet which pretty much deal it in the same way, which I don't want to go into because I rather hope that we could have a discussion. So what Lenin did in that pamphlet was to strengthen, to sum it up in terms of the U.S. labor movement, what Lenin was able to do in the same way that Engels got involved in the struggle between the SLP and the AFL. Lenin was able to give guidance to the American movement, particularly the revolutionary socialist wing. Because what was happening at that time, there was so much turbulence, so much confusion during the period, as I said, the war, and these different ideologies that were emanating in the labor movement as it was in those days between 1914 and thereabouts, maybe and 1920 when Lenin wrote this, was regroupment, splits. There was all kinds of developments that could throw you. For example, inside the Socialist Party developed a left wing. The left wing of the Socialist Party was like a party within a party. It was like what we were in the SWP for 10 years. We were really a party within a party. We had entirely different ideological, but Sam Marcy and Vinnie and Dottie and others, we wrote on them. We didn't hide behind them. We went to conventions and spoke on them. Conferences, we spoke on them. We were a minority, but they were the majority, and we had to follow the discipline of the SWP. Well, that's what was happening in 1919, right before 1919. A left wing of socialists developed completely in contradiction to the Socialist Party that was the majority on the war, on the defense of the Soviet Union, on a host of questions as to even the issue of dual unionism and industrial and I should make a point on it, the industrial development at the time, which I'll go into in a minute. The point I want to make is that the left wing of the Socialist Party recruited Eugene Debs. He left the IWW. He joined the left wing. And some of the other leaders, Vincent St. John and some of the others coming out of the Western Federation of Miners, became the left wing. And the moment came to split. And they split. And they became literally the Communist Party. But the Communist Party, as it split, was called the Workers' Party. And it had William Z. Forster, who was ultimately to be the head of the Communist Party, USA, and James Cannon, who was supposed going to be the head of the Socialist Workers' Party that we joined later on. And the two of them merged. In the fights that took place, believe it or not, what most would think, how could this have happened? That the Communist Party that dates over the years, the Trotskyists, and the Trotskyists called the Communists Stalinists and Trotskyists. I mean, it's an inflamed situation. But the birth of the movement, they were together. And at that time, Trotsky was fighting as a left opposition inside the Soviet Union against Stalin, who had made a turn to the right after Lenin's death. And documents began to come out from the Soviet Union that finally, through Canada, I believe, came into Cannon's hands as well as Forster. Cannon became a Trotskyist, and Forster became a patriot of the Stalinist government. And so ultimately another split took place inside the Workers' Party. There were other differences about being underground because the repression in 1920, and you may have read the Palmer raids and other things, it was incredible. The imprisonment, the torture, the physical violence of the state was incredible. But there was a dispute over whether to come out of the underground and start functioning or whether to stay underground. There was arguments in those days legitimately over whether the craft unions should be replaced by industrial unions. And that was a very important question. And Forster had a good position on that when he tried to organize the steel workers and the packing house workers. What I mean by industrial working class as different from craft is that the industrial trade unions, and I'll give my own example of taking steel. When I worked in the steel plants, we had 32 classifications from a roller all the way to a laborer. And the wage scales were in the hundreds and hundreds of dollars per hour that a roller got, but a laborer didn't. In craft unions, that laborer wouldn't have been in the AFL. Neither would others who do the bull work. It would only be perhaps the rollers, the maintenance, the electricians. They would be very selective. So industrializing the trade unions was a very, very progressive development. And it did take form in this period under a bit of fight with the Gompers forces. And in some cases, as in the 1917 steel strike, it failed because Woodrow Wilson and Gompers were hand in hand because of the war. So what I want to do is in giving you this picture, is to draw some modest preliminary conclusions. And that is this, that in every case where the communists ourselves are in the trade union movement or have some influence in the outcome of trade unions, it could be decisive, as small as we are. It could be, depending upon our understanding of revolutionary Marxism, our history that goes back to Marx, not only as a philosopher, not only as a theoretician, not only as having the ability to explain the very nature of capital, but he was an organizer, he was a tactician, so was Engels, so was Lenin, and if we have more time, we'd go into what Trotsky made a contribution during the course of his life based upon the experiences of the Russian Revolution. So that, as small as we are, with our history, understanding, skill, being creative but cunning as well, in regard to the class struggle, we can be a factor. Sometimes in winning concessions, where some, I've heard recently in a discussion, consider us a little kind of reformist because we're always fighting for concessions, and we don't seem to be fighting for a revolutionary perspective, which is a repeat of an old argument that existed as far as Lenin struggling with the economists in the late 19th century, where the economists were the Social Democrats, and the split took place between the Lenin forces and the Social Democrats over this very question of economists. Yes, we support concessions. Yes, we support any victory that the workers could make that denies capital its surplus value to whatever level. But we also pursue those concessions in a dynamic development with a revolutionary socialist perspective and view the tactics and the strategy that are necessary in the course of those struggles. So we are a factor, as small as we are. That's it.
This isn't going to be a formal, question and response. Didn't really have time to prepare for it. But there were a lot of terms that people may have questions or, even concerns about or confusion. So you may have questions about that or other things that you either want to ask Milt, or maybe we can just throw those questions open to the floor for everybody. I wrote down a few things because I think that not everybody here may know what some of these terms mean, or even, need like a refresher on them. Like, for example, dictatorship of the proletariat, for example. But maybe what we should do is just see if there's just general comments and questions, and then, see how to proceed from there. And we may want to just, instead of just asking, everything to Milt and have him answer it, we may want to accumulate a few questions, and then turn the floor back over to Milt. So I want to just open up the floor. Jesse.
What Kate thinks about the Million Worker March and our role in it. One reason why I came to this class, and I'm like, okay, good, but I need to understand it a little bit better. And then the other thing was, which I didn't know, I thought sometimes the terminology just was a product of its time period, but evidently Lenin knew, based on what you're saying, sort of that some people, or some leaders in the U.S. would have issues with the term dictatorship of the proletariat. So I'm sort of curious about Lenin, one probably know completely what was just said, but why that term was chosen?
Okay, so question question about Million Worker March, and our role, and also a question of more on the dictatorship of the proletariat. Arturo.
Can you elaborate on anarcho-syndicalism? And the other thing, my understanding that at the beginning of the 1900s around that a lot of the unions, I'm not saying that all the trade unions, but a lot, especially the immigrants, they had speakers and they would read to them. That's something that's not done. That was being read a lot of books. And that's how they were getting educated about this process. That has changed, and how can we, with the structure that we have now, how can we further that because of that change?
Okay, so a question on anarcho-syndicalism and also, process in the turn of the century where many of the workers were illiterate, and they would actually, in different places, I think most famously the cigar workers would hire somebody to read to them, and it was often, political and communist and trade union literature. And then how would we use the new technology maybe to do some of the similar things today? Other questions? Yes.
Yeah. This is a this is just a comment, but a couple of years ago, NYSUT, which is the union that represents most of the teachers in New York State, as they put it, K through 16, had a demonstration up in Albany, and there was the woman up there carrying a sign that she made herself, very nice sign that said, Pataki's budget equals class war against workers. So I went up and took a picture of her and went up and talked to her, and she said, yes, my father was a steel worker at Lackawanna, and he often talked about class war. So, I mean, the work that you did, or you and other people did at Lackawanna, is still going on for the second generation. But I want to just raise the issue, the union movement in France is organized different than it is in most other Western countries. In that in France, typically, there are 2 to 5 to 6 unions representing workers in each job site. And the unions, like the CGT and other, have historical relationship with other parties, sometimes yes, and sometimes they're just independent unions. And they cooperate. Would this be an example of a syndicalist union apparatus? Many of the things that you said, I think, pertain to France, but it is the way that the workers in France have been organized since the 1900s, early 1910, I think was the first. And most of them don't have, far fewer workers in France are covered by union contracts than in the United States. But they have a lot of rights that workers in the United States need a union for as a matter of law or constitution, such as 4 weeks vacation is a constitutional right in France. So anyway, I'm just raising this question.
Molly.
Well, I heard what was speaking about this today. I couldn't help but remember the work here was after Clinton signed the welfare law that created workfare, and so many presidents were sent to work really for free in the labor program. I thought we made an effort. We had a party for action, worked with
about it, just like a whole week ago. Okay. So that was our work to organize workfare workers and assuming the question is also unions, how we approach the unions on this. Okay. Heather?
Dual unionism, and a practical question, because Peg and I are actually in the same union, and that union just took a vote, according to Greg, who told me the good news last night, it's not good news, that they're opposing the Million Worker March, because they want to send their people to Ohio and Pennsylvania to, register for Terry or something. So my question was whether or not if people think it's a good idea, Mill thinks it's a good idea, organize something like, this is PSC union, PSC for the Million Worker March. In other words, to work inside of a union that some people in the union have decided that's what they want to do. But can it be done that you can continue to put the pressure on to have some people working right now, as Fred said in his speech last night, and everybody else was talking about it, it's a very important thing, this Million Worker March. So if there's ways of doing it, I mean, I'm in the NEA also, from being retired, and I've asked them to ask me to write an article for the local paper for the Million Worker March. So my feeling is, I'm looking actually for other people to come up with ideas of how best to organize if you are a union member, or I don't know, does that make me a dual unionist if I have two unions? I don't think so. But, what is it exactly we can do? Because on one hand, we're in the peace movement, on the other hand, some of us are in labor movement as well.
Okay. So we have a couple other questions, and then I see three. I'm going to take three, and then obviously this is a lot of questions to start answering. So Phil?
Okay, I just wanted to clarify for beginners such as myself the difference between the craft unions and industrial unions as far as like what kind of people usually were in craft unions. Because nowadays when I think of craft, I think of stuff like writers and musicians and stuff like that, and what they call quote unquote professional versus
Right. Sometimes it's called craft union versus industrial unionism because it's a view of how to organize too. But yeah, it's craft and industrial. What's the difference? And Leslie.
Communists form fractions internally within their own party. Those who are in unions. Could you talk a little bit about internally the formation of fractions within a communist party like our own, a democratically centralized party, what the role and responsibilities of those fractions are?
I appreciate the description that has between working within the existing trade union movement and those who want to start pure unions, so dual unionism. And it just made me think, of course we all support the Million Worker March very enthusiastically, and I do, but I know, from what I've heard, the Communist Party USA presently isn't really supportive of the Million Worker March. And I think that essentially it's because the AFL-CIO is not supporting it. But I wonder if they could make the accusation that the Million Worker March is a form of dual unionism. I mean, it's not a union, but it's outside the labor movement. So, could somebody level that criticism and say, well, that's dual unionism?
Okay. So there's lots. I mean, I'm sure there are other people who would like to ask questions. Why don't we start with that? And I think, Milt, you don't have some of the first ones. Jesse was asking about our view of Million Worker March and our role, and also more about, what you meant and what Lenin meant regarding, the dictatorship of the proletariat, and what the concerns were, and what does what my question is. I think that some people here may not know what that term means, and I was going to actually throw out a question just for people to think while he's answering this, is Cuba a dictatorship of a proletariat? So then, you know, and then why? And what does that mean? So, but we won't ask that, just as a thought about what, you know. So, and then I think you've got there already the anarchist syndicalism. Okay, so.
Well, Jesse.
Here you go.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad I didn't start out my talk by saying I'm not going to talk on the Million Worker March because that's not my subject. So I'm glad I didn't say that. The Million Worker March is the most important development in my judgment, and I'm sure other comrades and friends feel the same. Since the 30s. The reason, there are many, but I'll just mention a few. First is that in the last 40 or 50 years, there has been primarily two currents that have influenced the labor movement. One was led by the AFL-CIO right wing, and the way I'll describe that is when I mentioned Gompers died and didn't have to get elected again, the same happened for his replacement, who was part of a machine named William Green. He had to die before he got replaced by William Meany. Meany had to die, George Meany, had to die before he got replaced by Kirkland. Kirkland's the only one who lived and got put out of office since 1886, except for one minor election that took place by surprise which it didn't matter, it's a blot in history, I mean a bleep in history, when Gompers was in office it was around 1900. So here you have a wing that has inherited the aristocracy of labor and pursued it. Even George Meany once said, I've never praised and boasted, I've never been on a picket line in my life. That's a fact. That's a fact. Then there's another current in the movement, in the labor movement. It's called social democracy. And that's a number of different currents, from Democratic Socialists of America, who they claim Sweeney is a member of, besides the Democratic Party and its relationships to the labor bureaucracy. And that's an influential current, particularly in recent years, when Sweeney took office in 1995. He brought in a whole slew of social democrats in the hierarchy of labor. And then there's a new current that's just born. It's called the Million Worker March. See? And it's the first time since the Depression that a third current has entered into the labor movement in order to influence it in the direction of independent from the two-party system, independent from the machinery of government, independent from the state, in a sense, and class-wide. It's open to everybody. So here we are, a party that saw it as it was the moment that it was decided by two black leaders in a very militant local named Clarence Thomas and Trent Willis. And since they proposed the idea of a Million Worker March, it has gravitated to different sections of the country, including the city here, where Brenda Stokely, another labor leader, a woman labor leader, black woman, is part of this leadership. This is the most important development, and it comes at a time during the course of a bitter election. See, if it came after the election, it wouldn't be as significant because it's an effort to influence workers away from the Kerry Sweeney clique. Oh, nobody can hear? Oh, I thought I was having a conversation with Jesse. I'm used to one-on-one. This is very new to me. So it's the timing. As Lenin said, timing is everything in strategy. Not in program, but in planning strategy. The timing of the Million Worker March makes a fundamental difference in the development of it, because it's only the first step, and the party is in a block, a loose block with these African American leaders. Now it's important, and it may fit in with another question on the Million Worker March and dual unionism, is that the Million Worker March is a movement. It's not a union. It's not. As a matter of fact, we have to face some of the problems that may exist as we get closer to October 17th. And what are those problems? Lenin raised it in a way in his pamphlet, and I'm going to raise it in the same spirit. See? The Million Worker March has now got legs. It's spreading. Whether leaders want to stop it or it's got momentum because it's the right thing to do under the present relationship of class forces. So as Lenin explained, and I'll answer partially the dictator of the proletariat. One thing Lenin took note of: you don't open up doors to careerists, barristers, as he said, or lawyers, as we say. You don't open it up to those who see a development in a party. This is a movement, not a party. See? But what's coming into this Million Worker March are opportunists now, interestingly enough. Tendencies that have their own agenda. See, that the principle of fighting on the basis of our conception and the black leaders' conception is open for debate now and controversy. See, and we have to be alert and aware of how we block with the principles that thought this out, that has taken the heat from their own labor bureaucrats. For example, Clarence Thomas went to Southern California to speak to his international president, even though he got the support of a whole coalition of ILWU, the International Longshore and Workers, Longshore Workers Union. He went to the international president to see if he can get some resources, some money. And he got turned down cold. It's pressure. Everything is a struggle. So the point I'm making is that there is that, but it's not decisive. The leadership has control of the strategy and the program, and we have strengthened that relationship, not as a party with a very loosely constructed internal comrades that are not centralized, understandably so. Why, what Leslie is asking, and I'll take part of that question, a fraction within the party. One of the principal problems of building a fractions of trade unionists in the party, it's been many, many years since we even had a fraction in a trade union. That's number one. Does that disqualify the idea of not having fractions? No. But what's overwhelming is that the party is doing more. It's taken on so many different struggles that were primary and principal in the anti-war struggles, in the struggle against racism, in all these issue-oriented organizations. There are multiple amount of issue-oriented organizations. This is what we would like to see develop. Issue-oriented organizations that have their own issues come into the Million Worker March. This is a big challenge. Whether it's LGBT, the women's movement, poverty groups, community organizations, how to get them to view the Million Worker March as their movement that gives them strength, numbers, resources, hopefully, and changes the relationship of class forces. So building the fractions within the party appears to me yet premature but necessary. See, because we are a disciplined Bolshevik organization with that history behind us. So the question let me deepen the dual unionism question for a moment with the Million Worker March. I don't know, and I may not have heard everything you said, Heather, but I don't see a problem of an independent union. We have to distinguish between a dual union, that's challenging an organized AFL-CIO union, competing for its members, trying to give them an ideological direction away from the masses of workers for what their agenda is, which we'll get into anarcho-syndicalism in a minute or two. Dual unionism is different than a group of workers who are being denied by the official AFL-CIO and would like to find a way to start a union. As a matter of fact, the AFL-CIO, in its desperate period of losing numbers, has put it out there for associate trade unions members that are not working in a union situation but have relationships with the AFL-CIO in order to avoid a dual union or an independent union. There are laws in the AFL-CIO, jurisdictionally speaking, that reject any kind of dual unionism in challenging a jurisdictional power of a union to be able to just arbitrarily say, I'm going to organize workers who have already been involved with with unions, even in a decertification, which I don't want to get into. So I don't think this is a problem for the Million Worker March, from the point of view that whatever, take for example the NEA that you described. The NEA is not a member of the AFL-CIO. So, hey, come aboard, and they did. And it's a big up thing. It's the largest union in the country. So I don't think this is a problem at all. The Million Worker March is not even a coalition yet. It's groupings of volunteer organizations that come in if they're for a very elementary program. The program is based upon a whole series of grievances that they have against the government and the corporations, and they want you not to be supportive of the Kerry or Bush campaign. And be independent. That's pretty elementary at this point from the point of view of a revolutionary Marxist. who wants to see in this movement the raising of class consciousness and struggle and moving in the direction of winning concessions and also moving in the direction of a socialist perspective, which is, as Lenin said at that time, is yet for the Western imperialist countries, particularly the U.S., that had expanded the means of production and their industrial power, their technology, that it would take a very long time because the workers would be influenced in a non-struggle direction based upon bourgeois democracy, so-called, and jobs, which are now we're in the midst of a crisis. Now, anarcho syndicalism, let me see if I can put it this way. If we looked up the Webster Dictionary of what is syndicalism, what would we find? See, we would find that syndicalism are groups that get together. See, you've heard of a syndicate? See? Groups that get together for a specific purpose. See? And so the syndicalist aspect of the program that they're fighting within or that they want to pursue within the labor movement encourages groups of unions to regroup with a program that I described as building the trade union in conflict with a party, with a communist party. They denounce the party, a communist party, a socialist party for that matter, and they can get some mileage out of that because the socialist party is what it is, socialism without teeth. Isn't that the way we described Norman Thomas years and years ago? He lived longer than anybody I ever met. Anyway, so that's the syndicalist part, is a regroupment around a trade unions that will be the substitute to seize power. See, to seize power. That's very important. And then introduce the issue of a socialist transformation. The anarchist part of it is more directed in a sense which historically has really been removed, is direct action. Sometimes underground, sometimes in secret, sometimes in different forms, but it's direct action. So the combination of anarcho-syndicalism combines this kind of combination. And I think it would be helpful, now that you mentioned, to read Bukharin. What is it that I always get it backwards? The philosophy of poverty or the poverty of philosophy? What is it?
Poverty of philosophy is what Marx wrote to answer him.
Right. So if you want to answer, huh? No, I meant Bakunin. Yeah, Bakunin. So if you want to study a little of the theory of anarchist philosophy, it's in that volume. I didn't plan to, get involved. Now, U.S. Craft unions and industrial unions. Sharon answered the question in describing. I did it through one aspect of my own experiences in how industrial unions developed from the craft unions that were very reactionary, white, led, always the higher paying jobs, were linked to the question of craft unionism. Even today, when you go into the skilled trades, where you find carpenters, iron workers, bricklayers, and they are crafts. Even at this time in history, they are craft unions. You will find that black workers have a lot of grievances in the hiring hall that is set up, in the jobs that are available, where apprenticeships should be opened up, and they're very carefully being opened up for women based upon some court decisions. As a matter of fact, it's so counterproductive for the trades to have craft unionism that it actually leads to an employer being able to divide the workers, encouraging black workers to cross a picket line. You may have seen it even around our own neighborhoods. They put up this big rack, see, and they bring out hundreds of workers maybe on a rally, and they'll hire and pay for the day a few black workers to be on the picket line. See? But who walks through the picket line? See? Black, Latino workers. And the company laughs all the way to the bank on the basis, so that the national question is very important in understanding the relationship of the crafts to the industry-wide. For example, in the lessons that now, unfortunately, the manufacturing part of capitalism has taken a big downturn, so that the plant I worked at of 20,000 workers is completely shut down. Every steel plant, Bethlehem Steel, which was the second largest corporation in the world in total, is now bankrupt. It's been bought by a bunch of speculators who have non-union strategy and so on. So in the industrial unions, the advances that were made during the 30s and the 40s, due to technology, has shifted to the service-oriented workforce. This is a very positive thing for us in one sense, because the workforce now is more multinational. It covers up many, many more workers. The strategic center of the trade union movement, the strategic center has shifted to these workers that are in the service-oriented, women, multinational. And this, from the point of view of our thinking, planning, is very important. Sam wrote this. Marcy, who was our founding leader, wrote High Tech, Low Pay. That was in 1985 or 86, and it still stands on its own today and being confirmed. And then he has strategy in it. I encourage you also to read High Tech, Low Pay, where we have a chance. I hear it's out of print. Oh, good. Another round. For discussion? How about comments instead of questions?
Okay, we'll go through another round. I just wanted, could somebody just hand me that little pile of books? Just another plug for this really important pamphlet that has such an odd title, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. The subtitle, which is a popular essay in Marxist strategy and tactics, really gives you more of a sense of what it's about. It's only $2.50, and it not only covers this issue, but many other, like, you know, should communists participate in bourgeois elections, for example. So, but we also can recommend that if you don't have that, or if we sell them out, that www.marxist.org has so many of these, you know, important classics that you can just read online or print out, including this one. So, you know, I just encourage people to continue to read on this. I wanted to just intervene a couple things. Just in terms of fraction, I just to maybe hone it down a little bit, I think that it can be a fraction who are all party members, or it doesn't necessarily have to, and maybe this can be a question back to Milt. And it doesn't necessarily mean just the members in a union. But like to start with that, it would be if, you know, Workers' World Party had, which we did for many years, 3 workers in the Mahwah Ford plant in Mahwah, New Jersey, and they functioned together as a fraction. You know, they worked with other, you know, progressive workers and within the trade union movement and you know, struggled, but it meant that they operated together and had many consultations with the party leadership over strategy and tactics and what was happening on the job. And in addition, the comrades went out almost every week to the plant to distribute Workers' World newspaper while their shift went into the plant, so that they could approach workers who were reading Workers' World on their break and talk to them about the articles in the paper. So we functioned together, the party did, and participating and helping that fraction do political work in the plant. But, you know, the party could have a fraction working on Cuba work, you know, 3 or 4 people who participate and focus on that, maybe as their primary responsibility or maybe just as part of the responsibility. You know, the party has a fraction that works in the International Action Center. We have a fraction that works in the Million Worker March. But they're also, and I don't know if they're called fractions or not, but so this may be the question back to Milt, is in the TWU, the Transit Workers Union, for many years, there was a group of progressive workers who had, you know, disagreements with the union leadership over many strategies and tactics, because the union leadership was, you know, fairly moderate, and they wanted to have more of a struggle union. And that fraction was called New Directions. And there were a lot of tendencies and, you know, whatever, but recently, I don't know, in the last 5 years, that fraction actually won the election and are now the leadership of that union. And that's Roger Toussaint. And so, you know, I think that goes back to what Heather said, is it okay to organize separately from the trade union? And I think that, you know, obviously we can have a fraction in it, but you don't have to be just members. You can organize, you know, a progressive grouping of workers, and sometimes there's a situation where that progressive grouping can actually win the leadership of the union away from the reactionary leadership. A similar situation, I think, in the Boston Bus Drivers Union, which the party founded and for many years led, and then because of a reactionary push from the international of that union, was successful in pushing out for temporarily our leadership, which was not only just our members, but a whole group of progressive leaders in the union. And so then they functioned as an opposition progressive faction within the union, and then they, you know, worked very closely, diligently with all the workers, and then they won the leadership again. So is that, you know, is that a fraction? You know, I think, you know, just in terms of some of the definitions. Just in terms of industrial unions, I don't know, did everybody get that? That, like, if everybody in the plant is, for crafts, you're in different unions. And some of them, I guess, even weren't in the union because they weren't organized, or, you know, if they were very poor workers, the craft unions, well, you know, they can't afford big dues, you know, so that was their, you know, business union feeling. We won't organize them. They won't give us much money. But in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that whole broke apart. And because of the communists and progressives, and because of the tremendous class struggle that developed, they were able to have plant-wide unions. And so that's why it's the AFL-CIO, I think. The AFL was for many years, and then separately, the CIO, which were the industrial unions, developed in the auto plants and the steel plants and many other big industrial plants, and it was across the board. And this was extremely important because it meant all the black workers especially were in the union and played very big important roles. And this is especially in the Midwest and Detroit and, you know, Ohio. And, you know, Milt probably knows a lot more about that than I do. I think that's all I want to say. Okay, Khalil. Oh, Leslie then. Yeah. Okay.
Like me, I'm from the Midwest, and I always thought it was funny though. Down there, a lot of the places, the first job I actually ever had though was a job with a union, well, legal job, I guess. At 16, I worked for at some place called Rainbow Food. So that's the first time I worked. It was through a work study program in high school, but still, we were all in the union. And then I moved back down to Missouri, and I always found it funny though, down there, a lot of the places, we don't have that many unions, at least at the factories I worked at, like, it's Scholastics Incorporated. You know, they don't have a union, they don't believe in a union. There was some people, one day I remember we had a 2-hour meeting about why we don't need a union, and you don't have to talk to the union workers. You know, because there were some people standing on the corners on the outside of, you know, the factory. I was one of the people that loaded the truck, so I got paid a little bit better than the folks that were picking it and stuff. But a few of us decided we were going to try to organize a union. And it was weird that come Christmas time, we always get our little Christmas bonus, and then we have a 2-week layoff. You know, we have a 2-week vacation, you know. And it's weird that everybody that came back that tried to form the union, they said that we left 2 days too early, and now we were relieved and we were no longer allowed back at the factory. And you know, it's like, okay, next job I had, because I was also working like at for the state government too. Like I did that, and I did the factory stuff at night. So you know, I was a legislative assistant in the daytime. And I got to sit on my behind and watch TV and stuff. At least that's what I was told I better do. I better not do anything else. But and the same thing happened at Walmart, you know, where a lot of us were talking about forming a union. And you know, we got even in orientation, you know, we had this nice little I think it was like half-an-hour video. I don't remember how long it was, you know, as to the reasons why you don't need the unions and how Walmart would take care of it. And it's weird when a lot of us started, you know, we would make fun of their magazines about, you know, this corporate lawyer who quit his job so he can be a doorman at Walmart. You know, we used to say, the thing is, he probably didn't tell about his fraudulent practices or whatnot. But anyways, we would mention how, you know, it's crazy how we don't have a union. And at the time, they started using immigrant workers to do stuff for, you know, a lot of us weren't doing, because ever since we were just in the aisles and whatnot, and we noticed that, you know, they weren't getting the same benefits as us and anything else. And we started, you know, making that vocal, and we started being more vocal about having a union. You know, we were, at this point, we were mostly heckling it, but still, you know, they ended up they started writing us all up and having a process for us to be eliminated. And you know, and it's just weird. I never understood. I can understand the fear of it, but it's like, you know, dang, you know, it's like they're very reactionary and they're trying to do as much as they can in a lot of these companies. Because even when I moved here, I ended up working for a company that was down in Missouri. I'm trying to remember the name of it right now, but it's a factory I was working in Jersey up until February, when they laid off about, I said 80-something workers. And what the thing is, they laid off mostly people that had been there for like 12, 15 years, people that were about to get pensions or something like that. And they just fired all of them. You know, there was a lot of them that were getting like 18, 20 bucks an hour, and they replaced them all with temporary laborers who were only making $6 an hour. And them, I found out they weren't even getting raises. The temporary laborers, some of them have been working there for, 3-4 years and still haven't received a raise ever since they're temps. And so eventually now they end up replacing all of the workers with temporary workers. And they got rid of everybody except for the upper echelon. And there was and some of the mechanics too. Even some of the mechanics they started replacing with temporary workers, especially the ones that made the mistake of talking about unions. And so I'm just wondering, like, you know, what is this, I mean, I see so many unions, but I'm wondering what is this fear of unions? I mean, because there's so many unions out there. Why would these, you know, companies like Walmart, I mean, I would figure with how much money they have that they would have some to spare, you know, get more benefits, get better pay. So.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's just my observation. It's weird that 2 jobs I lost because I was being very vocal about unions, and I didn't fight it like I should have. You know, some people said you really should have fought, and perhaps I should have. And then the third one was because they were able to replace permanent workers with temporary workers who had no benefits. They had no health benefits or anything else, and got paid lower wages. So
this is very interesting because it really brings in a lot of issues, like, you know,
what's happening in the South in terms of, you know, why is there less unions there, you know, and why there's actually their right to work states, which means that the state intervenes against unions. And the issue of Walmart, that I read recently, that even regarding retail workers, they pay something like 35% less, you know, and especially that's true for any workers in the retail industry that are in a union. So why are the companies against unions? It's because they profit from no union, you know. But I'm sure there's, you know, a lot longer, you know, thing about that. But there's a very important struggle right now going on about how to organize Walmart workers, because they are the largest employer in the United States now with over 1 million workers. So, right. Well, they're now the wealthiest country in a company. So, but we can, you know, if the workers are organized, just like the auto industry, steel industry, all of them fought against the workers being unionized, and the workers won. You know, and we feel that that can be the case with Walmart if the labor union gets behind it, which, you know, really should happen. And that's some of the reason why there's a struggle within the labor, you know, leadership now, is like, let's get out there and organize the unorganized. Let's take on something like Walmart, because otherwise all the unions that are in the retail trade are going to be destroyed. You know, the Walmartization of the whole country. So, Leslie.
Well, I don't want to take, because I'm hoping Milt's going to get another round to discuss this, but I thought Jesse asked something that was very interesting about the use of the term dictatorship and proletariat. And why would Lenin use that if it was just going to rile up so many liberals and so many social democrats and so many anarchists? And I think it's such a good question because I come up against it all the time when I'm out talking to people. And I think that the answer, there's a lot of ways for us all to answer it, but I think one of the ways is that it wasn't the phrase they didn't like, it wasn't the wording they didn't like, it was the reality that they didn't like. The conception of what it was going to take to liberate enough turf to be able to build first socialism and then communism. And, you know, one of the things that came out of the experience of the Paris Commune in 1871, in which the working class there was able to, being armed by the war, by their own French bourgeoisie, able to seize power for 71 days, is, you know, the experience was that the German and French ruling classes who had armed their workers to kill each other, when push came to shove and it was about crushing the commune, they united in common class interest. and drown the commune in blood. And it was the only correction that Marx made and Engels to the Communist Manifesto, was the addendum that the experience that Paris Commune was that the working class can't simply take the NYPD or the LAPD or the Pentagon forces and the courts and the prisons and say, okay, now you're working for the working class and the oppressed, and expect them not to, expect the lion or the tiger to change its stripes, you know. So what Marx and Engels said, and Lenin was continuing, is that a bourgeois democracy is a form of state dictatorship. It's the dictatorship of the minority over the majority. And what it's going to take to liberate society is a period in which the working class and oppressed are their own dictatorship, but this time of the majority over the minority, until all those clan elements and cops and all the elements that the old ruling class can rely on to try to pull together as a weapon against the workers and oppressed have been defeated. So really when they're saying, oh, do you have to use that phrase, what they mean is, can't we vote our way out of this? Can't we tinker our way out of this? Can't we keep capitalism with some band-aids? But don't be talking about the workers and oppressed seizing state power.
But I was recruited and introduced to the party first by the newspaper in 1967 on a strike, and then I joined the party in 1969 from somebody who I worked with, and eventually we did have a faction of 3 people who did a number of things, but we also worked like with 3 other people, 2 progressive people, all African Americans at the time that we worked with, besides ourselves. And we did a number of things very well within the local. Eventually people left or retired, so I ended up being the only one left, which made it very hard for me to do anything within the union itself, because the union had started to go the other way, being a little bit more reactionary, conservative, and as Milt mentioned early on, and Fred mentioned last night, only economic things were being done. There was nothing else. After the Vietnam War, that's when that kind of stuff kind of just set in. So, but the Congress of Industrial Organization, which what the CIO, in my example, was no matter what, some people would call it craft, other people would call it different classifications within a company. You all belong to the same union. Different pay scales for different departments that you work in, some technicians and stuff like that. But that's my experience as far as that. And I retired last year after putting 40 years in. But it's a unique experience, because when I came to the party, Comrade Vinnie and Comrade Mill, and I've had this comment before, were very instrumental in teaching me how to be a revolutionary within the union, because I grew up with this union. I should have started that off. My father was a union bureaucrat. My father was on the executive board of the union from 1948 to 1974. He was either on the executive board or secretary treasurer. So, I grew up with, having some social democratic concepts about politics and the fact that unionism and what that all meant. So it was not, I had to just be able to turn some of the knowledge that I had grown up with the new knowledge that I received in the party and put it into practice. And it took me about a year or so to really totally understand what Vinnie and Milt were teaching, because it's not an easy transition to learn how to function, because there are some times that even as a revolutionary, and you go to do something within the union, that you've got to be aware that you do not try to push your co-workers too far, because then you might get, instead of going 2 steps up and 1 step back, you might go back to ground zero with some of them. Just the interesting thing, comments about, we haven't mentioned here the right to work statement. And there's many states, unfortunately, a good many of them are in the South, where, as an example, in Florida, a construction worker can get paid to drive a big payloader type thing for $6 an hour, where in New York State he'd be paid $18 to $22 an hour for the same type of thing. One being in the union and not in the union. And there's also other examples in the retail business. It started many years ago that the fact is they would hire a manager and assistant manager and everybody else would be part-time. The fact is they started that 25, 30 years ago to make the profit line higher. And the fact is that as you go along and see the progress, there are also other industries that will actually pay a nickel higher than what a union worker gets per hour to be able to keep the union out. Because they don't want to deal with the benefits, they don't want to deal with the ideology that goes along with belonging to a union. And like Walmart will pay above the minimum wage to start, to help keep out a union. That's one of their philosophies. And on that, Canada, they were forced to recognize the union in Canada, Walmart in Canada, which is one of the reasons why a lot of pressure started to be put on them here.
Sue?
I wanted to talk about the whole concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat, because I kind of disagree with Leslie, only I think it may be more semantics than anything else. I think a lot of people don't like the term dictatorship. But I think what is critical is you have to understand that we live in a dictatorship now. That it's the dictatorship of the ruling class through the state, through the courts, through the police, and prisons, that keep everything in line for the ruling class. I mean, we can just look at what happened in the streets of New York within the last 2 weeks, where the cops were used to stop dissent, to stop protest, and to intimidate people, to keep them from protesting. That's the state. That's the dictatorship of the ruling class. And I think people who don't have a clear understanding of class don't understand why you're needing the phase. It's not like it's going to be a permanent state, but the phase of the dictatorship of the proletariat. If you look at Cuba today is a dictatorship of the proletariat, because the Cuban government acts in the interest of the majority of the people in the country, of the workers. And when there's dissent that goes beyond certain bounds, the dictatorship of the proletariat takes a stand. You can look at what happened in Tiananmen Square, where the protest there was starting to really challenge the state. And the Chinese government had to act. That's an example of the dictatorship of the proletariat and why it's important. To me, the reason why people balk at it is because they don't understand that after a revolution, you have to have a state of, I mean it differently, that we have to have a period when the new relationship of forces are put into play so that this new state of the workers and the oppressed, of the proletariat, is allowed to grow and develop and gain power so that the old ruling class is no longer able to challenge it and gradually dies away. And how long that phase takes is another question. But as soon as the working class gains enough power and momentum so that the Rockefellers and the DuPonts and all those who have held power are no longer a threat to it, then the state can begin to wither away, and you stop needing the dictatorship of the proletariat in the same way that you did before. But it's a matter of relationship of forces, and you need the dictatorship of the proletariat in order to establish workers' power in a real sense. The other point I'd like to make is, as a member of the National Writers Union, we've begun participating in a group, and I believe it's called the North American Federation of Freelance Employees, but it's not that. It's something like that. It's NAFE, N-A-F-F-E, but I can't remember what all the letters stand for. But what it is a group of people who are working to establish rights for what are called contingency workers. That is, people who do not work, do not have permanent jobs. Because increasingly what's going on in the society is that workers are being, the workforce is being downsized, and people are having to work essentially on a freelance basis with no benefits and very few rights. And whether that's day laborers who shape up on a street corner in Freehold, New Jersey, or on Long Island, or it's people who work temporary office jobs, or journalists who are freelance. They're all contingency workers. And this creates an opportunity for a new kind of organizing. Because it's not craft organizing, it's not industrial organizing, but it's organizing contingency workers. So we're having to change some of the terminology of the different kinds of workers in this period.
Yeah, I want to do a show of hands and then also just a time check. We've been going on for about 2 hours. Usually the classes are about 2 hours, but maybe what we could do is say, another 15, 20 minutes. So I've got Bill Dories, Monica, Arturo, of course, Milt, Ron. Jesse again, okay. Anybody else? Okay. I think I'm going to call on Monica and then Milt.
Well, one of the greatest challenges that the Revolutionary Party faces, especially in a country like the U.S., is to raise class consciousness amongst the workers in order for the workers to realize that they're a class. They have a class, and therefore they have class interest. Because as powerful as the state is, and the cops and everything like that, and the prisons, etc., really the greatest weapon that the ruling class has is brainwashing the workers. I mean, that old saying that the ideas of any time are the ideas of the ruling class. That's the biggest challenge that we face, and that's why the Million Worker March is not only important. I mean, you can call a Million Worker March. It could have been called 9 years ago, 4 years ago, any time. But what makes it so important now is the timeliness of it. It's the timing of it. That's part of the beauty of it, because, and we're not saying that 1 million workers are going to be coming out, even though there's tremendous, we see the momentum growing for it is a groundswell from below. That's where it's coming from. But because it's coming right in the midst of the 2004 elections, when it's coming in the midst of this imperialist war that nobody is for. Everybody's against this war, and that's, very reactionary and just, just terribly just confused about it. But so many people in this country are against the war. Therefore, there's an openness. There's an openness to the ideas of something like the Million Worker March, along with the economy. Because people are now seeing the connections between no health care, no jobs, low wages, homelessness, growing poverty with the war. And this is something that neither Kerry or Bush can disguise. In fact, the elections are going more and more to the right, in terms of the propaganda of both Bush and Kerry, and people are becoming very disillusioned about that. So anyway, that's one point I wanted to make in terms of helping to change the consciousness of the workers, and mainly through the struggle. It's mainly going to come through the struggles, and then the revolutionary ideas usually come after that. But the main thing is to, and the other thing I wanted to raise too about, something else that's going on is within the labor movement is that some I forgot what union it was challenging the AFL-CIO's historic record in terms of supporting, imperialist policy. The endowment, I forgot the name of this. National, excuse me?
National Endowment for Democracy.
Yes. That some union was challenging, the AFL-CIO in terms of, you have to be careful, at least being careful about it. But I've never seen it raised in this type of way before, that it's, and I think it's all because of Iraq. It's all because of Iraq and Afghanistan, and it may be, I'm sure it's tied into this whole issue of, the so-called war on terrorism, and, why are you focusing in on Iraq when, you need to be focusing on, Osama bin Laden and, that type of stuff. But still, it's being raised, it's being challenged. And how do we help take that more to the left, so that the workers realize that they have no interest in imperialist policy and making it more, giving it more cosmetic, surgery or whatever, or making it more, appealing or whatever. So I just wanted to raise that to Milt too, in terms of what's the significance of this type of resolution, or also the resolutions coming out against the war. From all these different unions, some of them the most conservative type of unions around Iraq, and also a number of these unions are also tying it in with supporting the Million Worker March, although the AFL-CIO is just trying to put the kibosh on that.
It's the California Federation, which is of 2.5 million, I believe, in the state of California that are members, and they raised this issue of the National Endowment for Democracy. And the interesting thing about it is, it was fed by the way the AFL-CIO conducted themselves in the counter-revolution in Venezuela and supported a union that was primarily employer-led from the oil cartels. And that kind of pushed the AFL-CIO to such an embarrassment because of the strength of the Federation that they sent somebody out from the AFL-CIO hierarchy to say that they're going to look into it, which they never did since that resolution was passed. Now, what's important, about this and deserves more thought, is that the AFL-CIO has its own international center, see, and it's financed by the NED, which gets its finances from the Agency of International Development, which gets its finances from the CIA. See? So the movement that's emanating, which is a very significant development, really indicates that what those who supported the resolution in numbers wants the AFL-CIO to break with this international cabals that support through finances and other arms of the imperialists. It was the same thing that developed in Poland with Solidarity. The same exact thing. Solidarity was a counter-revolutionary movement of unions led by, I forget. Everybody knows him. You can't find him now. He couldn't run for, well, I don't want to use that word because it would indicate that dog catchers are, okay. The second point I wanted to make is this discussion between Sue and Leslie. See, what I may have made a little error in my remarks. I pointed out in regard to the dictatorship of the proletariat. I mentioned this great labor leader. I'm sorry, Eugene V. Debs. But I got to tell you, two things that should be taken note of. Because the Soviet Union no longer exists, and because Cuba is really the only small island of what, 12, 13 million trying to hold on against an imperialist monster, the issue of the dictatorship of the proletariat today is discussed a little bit more in academic conceptions of what Marx and particularly Lenin meant. In those days that I was talking about, the majority of the workers saw when Lenin raised the dictatorship of the proletariat as power to the workers that they didn't have. That the instruments that were organized around the reality of the seizure of power was the power it gave to the proletariat. If you think of the term dictatorship of the proletariat, you have to say the proletariat is the majority of humankind. So if there's a dictatorship of the majority of humankind, which is made up of workers, it's the most democratic thing that's possible. And as the dynamic of the reality of a socialist government begins to play out, the terminology gets lost in the reality. And though both of you presented a very eloquent position, it was based upon the past. It was based upon our interpretation of Marxism, see, and how we're trying to explain it that lends itself into a more abstract kind of discussion if it would come up outside the party. See? So I kind of felt that that's what is happening, because when the power is unleashed through a dictatorship, and I don't want to go over what you already said, both of you, it's incredible in terms of what is won immediately. And in this country, as well as in Europe, everybody was looking at this socialist government and watching while they were losing oppressed jobs and conditions of work and so on, all whatever resources the party had, which is also a dictatorship. The party is a dictatorship that expresses through its will, because of the strength of counter-revolution, as both of you described, how it expresses itself into the dictatorship of the proletariat. It becomes a reality of gains on the work levels. The trade unions begin to get more power. It was called, it's in the document, the all-Soviet Russia, I forget the terminology, but Lenin gave them power. as you'll see in the document. And once they had the power, see, these are workers in unions that were organized but had to fight just like you're describing your struggle to find a union. In the Soviet Union, that became liberation. See, you didn't have to organize. All you had to do is redistribute whatever resources were available from the counter-revolution and capitalism. And they did. Equality, reality of resources and distribution was equality, not the terminology. And I'm not sure Lenin used this phrase, and I hear it all the time in the labor movement. And we will sooner or later take that phrase on. A fair day's work for a fair day's pay. There's no such thing in capitalism. There's not. And and in the Soviet Union, it was all power. There was no such phrase. It's all ours. There's no such thing as a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. But yet, everybody you talk to in the labor, gee, we need a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. But they're not getting it anyway. But that's another question. Let me just answer Molly, because it was an important struggle, the workfare struggle. And we saw it very early, Larry and a few of the leading comrades, myself, and those in AFSCME. And we petitioned AFSCME, which is really a powerful numerical union, while it has deep problems in its leadership.
City workers.
Oh yeah, they're public sector workers. That it was clear to them, to the rank and file workers, that workfare members coming into their unions was downsizing and creating new kinds of conditions of oppression, working alongside a regular worker who was on a union wage and a union conditions. And we petitioned them, and I think Tony Murphy was one of those that they assigned, right? You worked for the union. They were willing to pay a few of us, Tony and Bandura and someone else. William, and then there was, yeah, and William, right, to come in. And what did we do? We did the most elementary things. We made up a card for a union that said, we, the undersigned, join the workfare union of District Council AFSCME. And the union was very happy at that time. And then we would go to all the different offices of the welfare, and gosh, why not? They'd sign up. We'd have cards that thick, and we'd turn it over to a committee that existed inside the District Council 37. And it was going great. I remember a meeting we had at DC 37 where hundreds turned out in this big auditorium to listen to who was the DC president, Stanley Hill at the time, outline. They wanted to hear, what do we do next? But Stanley Hill, unfortunately, was under the gun of the state and opposition, that there was a lot of corruption and misuse of funds and a whole, which, hey, we don't want to get into. But that's the point, was that you come to the workers with a program, with a perspective, with a strategy that they view as something that elevates their lives in terms of material conditions and economic. And I got to tell you, it just sweeps this period with all its turmoil developing and the pressure of the attack that goes even before the Reagan breaking of PATCO. The Poles have got to admit, when they take how many workers like to be in a union, even in this period with a labor leadership, with the attack on them, it's overwhelming for them to want to join a union. See? So these kind of experiences that the party has had, and we've had so many of them, we even formed during a very upturn called the Center for United Labor Action. Now, my conception at the time, to show you how naive I was, but optimistic, was when we formed the Center for United Labor Action, and we actually had an office on 7th Avenue and 21st Street. Right. I said to myself, when we opened that office and we had our first meeting, so on, I says, you know, this has the potential of challenging the AFL-CIO in New York for dual power. Really, I may have said it to Larry or somebody. Well, you know, we didn't have the resources, and what happened was we had a newspaper, we had meetings, we had workers coming around. There was a cemetery strike. We sent forces out there to support those grave diggers because they came to us. I mean, workers were coming in from all over, even someone from your union. He's dead now. I can't think of his name, but he was in the CW. No, he was in anyway. Wouldn't matter now. They would come and they would discuss their problems. They had a place to come to, rather than a union meeting where they were buried by bureaucracy and machine and set up. The meetings became smaller and smaller. Workers didn't even want to go to meetings because there was nothing to do. They would come to our office and we'd get all the grievances. So let me end on this note. The more we know about the consciousness of the workers now, the more we understand by being out there, whether you're on a job that has no union, but you're working alongside workers, and you're discussing, and you're getting a feel for their mood, and you bring it back to the party, and we figure out how to organize it. For what? For the Million Worker March. See, everyone that I appeal to who leaves the meeting, to go back and feel your relationships with workers, not from the point of view of it's an abstract conversation, but from the point of view of assessing who is better than somebody else in terms of consciousness. We're all not on an equal basis. We're looking for leadership. This is a crisis of leadership in the movement that's being led by the Million Worker Marches of black leaders. And it's a crisis of leadership inside the union movement. It's a crisis of leadership wherever workers begin to feel left out, disregarded in terms of their wages, working conditions, and even their dialogue with them. We need to take all that and make it into a collective property, and I use property in a good way, of the party. See, the collective property of the party, and we all have something to contribute so that it's not just the unions because of their relationship to production. That's what Lenin was writing about. They were learning all the skills and how to organize so that when they took power, they can give that power to the socialist system. That was what they needed in a country that didn't have the resources of the U.S. and the more advanced industrial countries. So it's a collective thing. Now, and just in answer to whether we have fractions or not, and I'm glad you refined it, Sharon, this is a fraction in that sense. We're all a fraction of the Million Worker March. We are. Okay.
Okay, we have 4 more people, so I think, we'd like, to call on them, and then I guess maybe hopefully, if people can stay till 6. Everyone should know, and if they can, I think it's going around right now, that PBN is showing a film. Today is the anniversary of the CIA instigated coup in Chile, in addition to, of course, you know, the more recent September 11th. And they're going to be showing a sort of a docudrama, I think it is, reenactment of those days. That's tonight at 7 o'clock at the IAC. And just in terms of this wonderful pamphlet, which I think is marked for 5, but we can certainly sell it for 3, there's one picture of, there's actually many pictures in here of the many, many demonstrations that Work Fairness organized. Because in addition to working with the unions, we went out and organized the Work Fairness workers on our own and had many very militant demonstrations in front of the welfare offices as well as down at City Hall. And this banner says, "We want in the unions, don't use us against them." And at the time, tens of thousands of people in the workfare program were doing essentially union jobs. They were doing the jobs of the city workers, and there was, you know, a potential for resentment, you know, and a division among our class, you know, based on this. And this was a very significant contribution that we made, and to show that you know, that what we need is solidarity with the mostly women workers on welfare, more oppressed workers who really deserve a union job, and the city union workers themselves. So really very nice little pamphlet. So I'm going to call on Bill. Oh, okay. Monica?
Quick announcement before you go to, I want to thank everyone for helping on the mailing. We got it done. Except we need 2 volunteers to go with Milt, who graciously has a car and is willing to go to 33rd and 8th Street so we can, you know, mail all the 1,700 pieces that we did today. So we need 2 volunteers to go with Milt after.
Okay, great. Arturo and Bill.
In the basket for me, take it out and buy this.
No. Now, we're going to give you the money here. But if anybody did give money and need it back to buy a book, that's fine. Okay. So, yeah, and... Oh, okay, but let's quick, because Bill Dorries has wanted to speak for a long time, so...
Called Brenda Stokely is going to an event at River United States Power or something at 145th Street and Riverside Drive tonight to distribute literature for the Million Worker March. And if there are any volunteers to go help her, it would be greatly appreciated. So if you want more details, call Marie at IAC.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Shows how much we're very much involved in this. Okay, Bill Dorries.
Khalil's story shows how the reason we don't oppose taking ultra-left anti-union or dual unionist position, because the bosses don't want any unions, no matter how conservative the leadership, because they have to increase they don't just want to get richer and increase their profits. They have to. That's the iron law of their system. They have to drive down wages. I'll give an example of dual unionism. We didn't only have the CULA in New York, we had it in a number of other cities, Saturday Night Labor Action, including in Norfolk, Virginia, where Monica and Ann will remember that, we had a genuine mass base in the oppressed community, especially in Norfolk. But there was a particular, and we were involved also, we had comrades and members of CULA in a number of plants where we were either active in the unions where they were there or involved in union organizing drives. One particular strike that I want to remember was in 1978 at a plant called Stewart Sandwiches, and it was women workers, mostly women, mostly black, white, and Filipino, who were trying to organize into the Teamsters Union. And we were on the picket line every day, every morning supporting them. And one other political tendency was involved there, the Revolutionary Communist Party, which has a dual unionist position.
They came to the strike. They, I think, had one member in the plant. They came to the strike, and they told the workers, they were active, they were on the line, but they told the workers the union and the bosses are equally bad, the same thing. You need to organize your own independent revolutionary union. The strike was defeated because the workers got demoralized and disillusioned, and they put a rift between the Teamsters Union and the workers. And of course, the Teamsters Union had a very reactionary leadership at that time, but that is not the character of the leadership and the character of the union as a workers' organization are two different things. And this speaks to the difference between a union and a party. The power of a union is the ability to shut down production. To shut down production, you have a strike, you want every worker in the union, you want every worker on that strike, in that strike. There's a worker on the machine over there, maybe he or she is pro-war, maybe they're even racist or a bigot or anti-gay or anti-woman, you know, whatever. You still want them in the union, you want them to walk out when the strike happens. You want 100% union membership. But you don't want that person in the party, because the party's job is to lead the working class away from racism and away from national chauvinism and sexism and bigotry. And for that, and this is so to try to form a union that's pure, that has only revolutionaries in it, it defeats the whole purpose. Some people write off the trade unions because they're not revolutionary. They write off the whole working class because it hasn't become revolutionary. If the unions could become revolutionary on their own and make a revolution, you wouldn't need a party. That's why you need a party, because, as Lenin made a very big point, especially in What Is to Be Done, the working class on its own, spontaneously, can only come to the level of trade union consciousness, the level of fighting for better conditions on the job. You need a revolutionary party to bring in the struggle for power. That's the job of the party, and the job of the party is to lead the unions. The Million Worker March, and to bring a revolutionary program to the unions and to the entire working class. The Million Worker March is not dual unionism. The Million Worker March is a struggle for leadership inside the labor movement by labor leaders from a number of unions. A longshore local town on the West Coast, AFSCME 1707 here, Teamsters 808, among others, the list is growing, among these leaders who want to bring a more militant struggle perspective to the labor movement. Just like the CIO in its day brought to the labor movement when it raised the perspective of industrial unionism as against craft unionism in the 1930s. And it's also an attempt to broaden out and bring into alliance with the labor movement the millions of, and we say members of the working class, whether you're in a union, even if you have a job, you're still a worker, millions who have been excluded from the union movement, who are not organized, in large part due to the cowardice and lack of vision of the top union leaders, be they Meadyites or Sweeneyites. And it also has a perspective of breaking through, of fighting the biggest problem facing the U.S. labor movement, which is its isolation. Not only its isolation from the mass of unorganized workers in this country, because the union movement has been shrinking under this leadership for the last couple of decades, but the working class of the entire world, because the U.S. labor movement has isolated itself, because its leaders wave the flag and say, "Buy America," and they used to be anti-immigrant, some still are. While the only hope for victory of the U.S. working class is an international unity against the imperialist ruling class of this country, which is the #1 enemy of labor everywhere. And this has its roots in the whole situation after World War II, when the super profits that were made by the imperialists, because the U.S. had such a dominant world position, allowed the growth of a huge labor aristocracy and a section of the working class, in essence, be bought off by a section of the working class, be bought off by the bourgeoisie. But these very super profits eroded the material basis for this, because these very super profits paid for the technological revolution that's now destroying jobs and destroying the unions when that technology is in the hands of the capitalists. And this speaks to something that, a quote from Trotsky that Milt has in this article that he wrote, Liberation and Marxism, about how the era of reformism is ending. Trotsky wrote this in 1940, that's 64 years ago, that you really need a revolutionary perspective to deal with the problems facing labor today. They cannot be solved on a reformist basis. And I just want to quote one more quote from Trotsky that he said, the unions are the working class as it is. The party is the working class as it should be.
I have two more. I see another hand though. Make it short. Ron hasn't spoken yet.
I was just going to pick up on the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat. I don't know whether I'm going to really much to it, but anyway, idea also around dictatorship of the proletariat is people evidently think that there's something about just nihilistic about having a dictatorship. It's not just a nihilistic word. The point is that you do have such a thing as a certain type of behavior between human beings. And there can be, you have to establish what is that behavior that should be, that we should all practice. So that becomes in itself, if it's a correct behavior, then it becomes a dictatorship of that behavior. So it's not a negative word, it's a word about how we're going to live together in a world. That's what it turns out to be, because it's the majority of the people who are here. And if we're going to practice my taking advantage of somebody is willy-nilly just as good as not taking advantage of somebody, then we're not in really a civil society. So that's the essence of what we're pulling for when we say dictatorship of the proletariat. How do we interact with each other?
Right. Yeah, like what about Cuba, what kind of behavior you're talking about that they outlaw is that they outlaw the exploitation of another worker. You cannot hire, if you're a Cuban, a worker and exploit their labor. And there was a grouping a couple years ago that started organizing a petition. And what they wanted to do, of course they didn't say we want to exploit workers. What they said is that they basically wanted to run a business, but that's what it is explain. And you know, the Cubans let them petition actually, and they got a few thousand signatures. But the Cuban comrades and unions and everything also organized a huge educational campaign about what is it that they were really asking to do, which was, to exploit the labor of somebody else, So they not only, they actually didn't use the state against them, because really what the dictatorship, the proletariat is primarily is the suppression of the the old capitalist class, which would like to reemerge and start to exploit again. And they still exist, or they exist internationally, and that's who has to be suppressed. So like you said, it's the question of behavior. You cannot exploit another person. So we have 2, 3 other people who, first Arturo.
Okay. I just want to say thank you for this wonderful class. And the role of the party, at least from my perspective, it's helped me, and it's 3 years ago or 4 years ago when I moved to New York, I was unaware of my class. I didn't understand why. I knew that there was problems, but I wasn't aware. And as I started struggling at my school and saw the intrinsic flaws in their system and how they were abusing and exploiting the workers, not only the teachers, but the students, we started to organize. But how did that happen? It was a mere, maybe a freak accident, but I met Molly. She introduced me to the party, and I started to get educated. So I'm answering my own question, basically, how do you educate? I started to get educated in the party. And through that, we've been able to have the union come on and be in support of the workers. Now, because of the party and the understanding of class and understanding of bureaucracy within the labor movement, there are factions already splitting in our union leadership in the student movement. There's one leader who's an anarchist. There's others who have no idea what their class is still. And now I presented the Maryland Working March, and they've endorsed it, but they don't want to put any rubber to the ground, as I would say. They don't really want to push forward. And they're struggling. They want to go running back to Big Papi and say, UAW, will you help me? Instead of taking it all amongst themselves. But funny this is, we started going around the campus putting up flyers, and I have all this literature. And I started to see all these other workers, the workers that are unionized with other unions, and I know them. So I started giving out literature in front of the student workers who are helping coming around. And hopefully because of the party leadership with theory and practice going together, and we're focused on the Million Worker March and how that is fundamental to raise consciousness for the masses. It's giving us a tool to talk to others. I apologize for being late today. I got stuck giving out Million Worker Marches at the market, and people were asking me a plethora of questions. Most of the response was, where are the buses?
Wow, nice question.
Where are the buses? You know, people they're dying for another solution. They see that there's an intrinsic flaw, but they don't understand the relationship to it. And that's where we come in. With that said, every time I'm out there giving literature, I meet somebody who says, I know what capitalism does, it exploits people. But I don't know what I can do. They're struggling because they have been taught the nihilistic way that, you know, there's nothing you can do really. All right? So I always get their phone numbers and I'm inviting them to come to the next step. Same thing I'm pushing with the leadership, with the other students. Take it to the next step. They're fighting me, but you know, whether it creates another split in there, it doesn't matter. You know, I'm almost out. But I want to say it's because of the party, because of the educational practice with the Friday night meetings, with these teachings that we have here, and with the relationship with the sponsorship with the other comrades, I've been able to grow and understand of the class struggle and if the bigger picture that is here and what is at stake, what is really at stake. So I want to thank you.
Okay, so we have Jesse and then Tony.
I can pass. The only thing I want to quickly say is thank you so much, Milt, for coming, because it was very clear, concise, understandable thought. And also the feedback from the people, like, whatever. Like, it's good for you to remind you, of course, I know about the Paris Commune, but just remind people, because for me, one of the reasons why I want to see this film tonight is it's sort of a reminder of how vicious, I mean, yes, capitalism is vicious historically and against all sectors. But at the time when there's actually a change done, even in a sense, in their liberal way, it's crushed. And it's crushed. I had a friend when I was growing up, and his parents were from Chile, and they just got out on time, basically. And how, like, there's this film about people in Chile, like a young generation, people in Chile born after the coup, and how it was just all of a sudden to be confronted after, you know, Pinochet was out of power. I mean, he's formally out of power. With what the past was, what a shock it was, and how much work it would take, and it does take, to redevelop that whole movement. And my attitude sort of is while I still think that we should use language that people understand, I do think it's important to explain to people what it means. At your point about, like, reminding people, like, you just give historical incidents in the U.S., like, we live in a dictatorship, albeit of a specific form. Like, we have to be clear about what it is. But I think when people relate to you on that, then you can get into that other conversation. But there is a lot of brainwashing out there, so, you know, we got a lot of work to do. Okay.
Tony.
I'm seeing these books reminding me a lot about what we did when our efforts to organize workers into the union that was a union that was supposed to represent them based on the jobs they were doing. They were driving people who were on public assistance into jobs in the parks and all kinds of jobs that should have been covered by District Council 37. And when we did this, we were sort of ridiculed, attacked by some in the social democratic layers of the labor movement who said, how can you work with the leadership of DC 37, Stanley Hill, who, though he had a liberal outlook, was working hand in hand with the right-wing mayor. And they said, how can you work with this awful reactionary leadership? And our reasoning was, one, to be where the workers were, and two, to push the leadership to do something better. We weren't able to accomplish that, but we were saying the nature of this organization is it's a workers' organization, like Bill was saying, it's a workers' organization, and you can push the leaders. And it reminds me, my first union experience was working with the school bus drivers union, and I hope you remember more details about this, Milt, but the then President Steve Kirschbaum told me about a time that the workers wanted to strike and the leadership didn't want to strike, and they got the president of the union out, or the president of the International, to come make a statement before TV cameras. And before he did, they opened a banner behind him that said "On Strike." And he turned around and he defended the strike to the TV cameras because they pushed him to do it. And you can push the leaders of unions to do. So these are the kind of factors. And we were hoping to do this, not in that way, but we were hoping to do this. And but also being with the workers was so important. And we wanted to. We had cards. We wanted to make sure with the union. William and I and Bondora went out to different sites. We went to the parks. We went to all these different things. We organized meetings with different groups of workers. We talked to them. And we also, because we couldn't, that they had a committee that they had at the union. And they really sort of funded this, but didn't allow us to do as much as we wanted. And so we had to take independent action. We organized a lot of demonstrations. And one thing we did is, and I'm sorry to go on, but I'm going to wrap this up with this next anecdote. Giuliani hired from Wisconsin, where they started Workfair, Jason Turner, who they hired this person with an incredibly fascist outlook to be the head of this Workfair program, the head of the welfare department in New York City, but the head of Workfair, because that's what he had done in Wisconsin. In an interview, Jason Turner told somebody that he thinks pushing people into these jobs was worth it because work gave people dignity, and then he said, work will set you free. That's a direct quote from Jason Turner. And so when he went to be, to the city council to be confirmed, yes, thank you. We held a press conference outside of City Hall. We brought, Workfair workers came. We said what we had to say to the media. And then we went inside, and when Jason Turner spoke, we disrupted his speech. And the Workfair workers who were there, it surprised me actually. They got right in his face. They got right in his face. I don't remember the name of the worker. I don't remember if you were there.
Yeah, this is a Workers' World. Actually, if you go online, there's a Workers' World story.
Yeah, and she got right in Jason Turner's face and said, "You give us jobs, and we hate you." And it was an incredibly powerful moment. And I mean, we did a lot of great organizing. We had demonstrations, but we didn't have that kind of power that the workers themselves had. It was very, that's what we wanted to harness and work with and promote. And, we'll do it in other situations.
People may not know that, everybody here may not know that the reason there was a staff that work will make us free.
I'm sorry. Thank you for explaining that.
Because those were the words over the door leading to the exterminating death camps of the Holocaust in Germany. The Nazis put that over the door. Arbeit.
Something like that.
Yeah. Work will set you free.
Right.
That the extermination camps for Jews and communists and lesbian and gay people and Romani and so forth, under the pretext that they were work camps, not extermination camps. So those were the words over that entrance, which is why it was so horrible that he would say that.
Right.
Yeah, that was a big thing.
Yeah. I heard it asked.
So I think we have two announcements, one from Monica.
Well, you know, this has been just a great class.
Oh, it's
really. And you know, when you talk, just hearing the comments talk about, you know, the whole issue of dictatorship, and I'm going to my announcement in a minute, but I just have to say this, that, you know, we have to reclaim what's ours. You know, we have to reclaim what dictatorship means. We got to reclaim what revolutionary means, because the bourgeoisie will co-opt everything. When they talk about dictatorship, they talk about Hitler and, you know, individuals, you know, when it serves their interest. When it serves their interest. They don't talk about how the U.S. ruling class backed Hitler, especially in relationship of moving eastward, you know, trying to take over Eastern Europe, especially marching towards the Soviet Union. You know, when they talk about revolutionary, they talk about revolutionary lipstick and all this stuff. You know, they try to co-opt Martin Luther King or you know, our heroes, Malcolm X. So we, you know, Che Guevara, you know. So we have to reclaim what's ours. We got to explain, you know, where all this comes from and where it's really rooted, which is really rooted in the working class struggle. And I just wanted to, what inspired me to make this announcement is what Arturo said about the fact that, you know, people out there are so enthusiastic about the Million Worker March, but they don't understand what their relationship is to it. Then what we can do is invite them to this rally. We need to invite everybody we can to the Workers' World Party rally, because this is not only going to be a rally where we explain what our revolutionary positions are, but we want to use the rally to build for the Million Worker March. We want to explain the significance of it. We're planning to have a Million Worker March table there so people can get involved, along with the Workers' World Table and, you know, other, you know, tables that offer political analysis and struggle. And I just really want to encourage people to take, not only to take these palm cards that we put in the mailing today, but come in and make phone calls if you can during the week, because there's going to be 1,700 people who are going to be getting this mailing by Monday. And really what's going to be decisive in terms of getting people to the rally is making phone calls to them, because these are our supporters and subscribers of the paper, and we even mail to some of the IAC friends who know the party. So if people can come in, you know, during the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the phones will be here, they'll be available to you here, or you can come and get phone lists. You know, we really need the help in terms of making this a successful rally, and we have a week to build for it. So that's my push.
One comment. For those of you who are not aware, we have obtained a park and a sound permit for the 21st and the 27th in Dulles Cemetery Park to welcome Hugo Chavez to New York.
That's one announcement I didn't make, that anybody who wasn't at the meeting last night, it's very likely that Venezuelan President Chavez will be here the 20th through the 22nd, and there'll be a public event where he'll be speaking on the 20th, and then there is going to be a welcome picket at the UN, either the 21st or 22nd, when he's addressing the General Assembly.